The young black girl collapsed among the wheat stalks, her bleeding hands unable to grip another stalk, when the weathered cowboy dismounted his horse and simply said, "It's done." The townspeople gathered at her fence line, whispering cruel certainties. She'd lose everything within days, just another freed slave's child crushed by impossible dreams. The wealthy rancher circled like a vulture, offering pennies for what her dead father built from nothing. But the mysterious cowboy carried secrets heavier than guilt, seeking redemption through a debt that bound him to her family's buried past. Hidden beneath her father's wheat farm lay mineral rights worth a fortune, but only if she could save what she already had. The conspiracy against her ran deeper than anyone suspected, and time was running out. Would the girl who everyone dismissed as broken find the strength to expose the truth, or would the weight of their expectations bury both her dreams and the secret that could change everything? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The wheat field stretched endlessly under the Texas sun, golden stalks swaying like they were mocking Eliza Turner. She gripped the sickle with hands already raw from 3 hours of cutting. 2 acres down, 58 to go. 10 days. That's all she had before the bank came for everything her father built. Sweat dripped into her eyes as she bent for another stalk. The blade slipped, nicking her palm. Blood mixed with dirt on her fingers. She pressed on. From the road, voices drifted over the fence. "Mrs." Henderson's shrill laugh cut through the morning air. "Poor thing doesn't know when to quit. Samuel should have sold years ago." "She'll be begging Blackwood for scraps by Sunday," came another voice. "Mark my words." Eliza's jaw tightened. She swung the sickle harder. The sun climbed higher. Her back screamed. Her arms felt like lead. By noon, she'd managed another half-acre. At this rate, she'd finish sometime next month. The banknote would be due long before then. A shadow fell across the wheat. Eliza looked up to find Jeremiah Blackwood sitting atop his black stallion, hat tilted to shade his weathered face. His smile never reached his eyes. "Miss Turner, hot day to be working alone." She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been thinking about our conversation. My offer still stands. $300 for the whole spread. $300. For 60 acres of prime farmland that her father had purchased for $800 just 5 years ago. Like I told you before, the farm's not for sale." Blackwood's smile widened. "Course it is. Just a matter of when." He tipped his hat. "I'll check back tomorrow, see how you're progressing." His horse kicked up dust as he rode away. Eliza returned to cutting wheat, but her hands shook now. $300 wouldn't even cover her father's medical debts, let alone give her a fresh start somewhere else. But what choice did she have? The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Her water ran out. Her hands bled through the cloth wraps. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. By evening, she'd cut 4 acres total. 4 acres in 12 hours of backbreaking work. She needed to cut 6 acres per day just to have enough wheat to sell for the bank payment. At this pace, she'd lose everything her father died protecting. That night, she sat at his old desk, staring at the bank notice by candlelight. The numbers hadn't changed. Due in full, $942. The wheat, if she could harvest it all and get a fair price, would bring maybe $1,100. If she could harvest it all. She pulled out her father's Bible, the one he'd carried since the war. A letter fell from between the pages. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. It was a deed, not for the farm, but for land upstream. 200 acres her father had purchased 3 years ago, land she'd never seen. Her heart raced as she read the legal language. The deed was conditional on maintaining ownership of the original farm, lose the wheat fields, lose everything. But why had her father kept this secret? What was upstream that made him spend their savings on land they couldn't even use? Morning came too soon. Eliza dragged herself back to the wheat field, every step agony. The sickle felt heavier today. The sun seemed hotter. She managed 2 acres before her knees gave out. Sitting in the dirt among the wheat stalks, she finally understood what everyone had been trying to tell her. This was impossible. No person could harvest 60 acres alone in 10 days. Her father had always hired 3 men for harvest time. Tears she'd held back for weeks finally came. She'd failed him. Failed everything he'd worked for. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A man approached on a paint horse, moving slow and deliberate. He was older, maybe 35, with sun-weathered skin and a slight limp when he dismounted. "Miss Turner?" She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be caught crying. "Yes. Name's Silas McCade. I heard you might need help with your harvest." Eliza scrambled to her feet. "I can't pay much up front. Didn't ask for payment up front." He surveyed the uncut wheat, then looked back at her bleeding hands. "How much time we got?" 9 days. He nodded once. "We better get started then." "We?" Suspicion crept into her voice. Why would a stranger offer to help for free? "What do you want?" Silas picked up her fallen sickle, tested the blade against his thumb. "To finish what needs finishing." He handed it back to her. "That a problem?" Every instinct screamed not to trust him, but 9 days remained. And 56 acres of wheat still stood uncut. She was drowning, and he'd thrown her a rope. "No," she said finally. "That's not a problem." Silas worked like a man possessed. His scythe moved in perfect rhythm, cutting wheat in smooth arcs while Eliza bundled behind him. By the end of their first day together, they'd harvested 8 acres. 8 acres. More than she'd managed in 2 days alone. "How do you cut so fast?" she asked as they shared water by the fence. "Practice." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Worked plenty of harvests." That much was obvious. His technique was flawless, his pace steady. This wasn't some drifter looking for easy work. Silas McCade knew farming. The second day brought blisters and aching backs, but also progress. 10 acres cut and bundled. The impossible was becoming possible. Eliza found herself stealing glances at her mysterious helper. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He knew when rain was coming by the way clouds gathered. He could tell good wheat from bad just by touch. "Where'd you learn all this?" she asked during their midday break. "Here and there." He pointed to a section of wheat near the creek. "That patch looks ready. We should take it next." Always deflecting. Always redirecting to the work. On the third morning, Eliza woke before dawn to find Silas already in the fields. She hurried to join him, embarrassed to be caught sleeping while he worked. "You don't have to start without me." Couldn't sleep. He handed her a bundle of wheat stalks. "These need tying." They worked in comfortable silence as the sun rose. Eliza noticed Silas favored his left leg, especially in the mornings. An old injury, maybe from a horse, but he never complained, never slowed. By noon, they'd established a rhythm. He cut, she bundled. They moved like dancers across the field. Neighbors had stopped gathering at the fence. Word was spreading that Eliza Turner might actually pull this off. That afternoon, while organizing her father's papers for the bank meeting, Eliza made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in her father's old trunk beneath winter clothes and family photographs lay another deed. Her hands trembled as she read the legal description. 200 acres upstream, purchased 3 years ago for $600. Land she'd never seen, land her father never mentioned. The deed's conditions were clear. Ownership was contingent on maintaining the original farm. Lose one property, lose both. But why the secrecy? What was upstream that made her father spend their savings on mysterious land? She remembered his weekly trips, always on Sundays, always alone. He'd said he was checking on cattle, but they only owned 3 cows. The trips lasted hours. Now she understood. Evening came with questions burning in her mind. Over a simple dinner of bread and beans, she studied Silas across the table. He ate methodically, efficiently, like a man accustomed to uncertainty about his next meal. "You knew my father." It wasn't a question. Silas looked up from his plate. "Heard of him. Good reputation." "More than that." Eliza leaned forward. "You know exactly how to work this land. You know which sections ripen first, where the good wheat grows. That doesn't come from reputation." Silas set down his spoon. For a long moment he studied her face. I worked for Jeremiah Blackwood 2 years back. The admission hung between them like smoke. And? Your father was an honorable man, more honorable than he had reason to be. What does that mean? Silas pushed back from the table. We should sleep. Long day tomorrow. But sleep wouldn't come. Eliza lay awake thinking about the upstream property, about her father's secret trips, about Silas's connection to Blackwood. Nothing added up. The fourth day brought clouds and the threat of rain. They worked faster, racing against weather that could ruin everything. 12 acres fell before the storm hit. Huddled in the barn as rain pounded the roof, Eliza watched Silas repair a broken scythe handle. His hands moved with practiced skill, like he'd done this 1,000 times. The land upstream, she said suddenly. You know what's there. Silas didn't look up from his work. Do I? My father didn't buy 200 acres to look at scenery. There's something valuable there. Maybe. Maybe isn't an answer. He tested the repaired handle, satisfied with his work. Your father was smart, smarter than most gave him credit for. Stop talking in riddles. Some riddles solve themselves. Silas stood as the rain began to lighten. Time to get back to work. The 5th day dawned clear and hot. 20 acres remained with 5 days to finish. They were ahead of schedule, but Eliza felt time pressing like a weight on her chest. Blackwood rode by again, his surprise evident when he saw their progress. This time he didn't stop to chat, just sat on his horse watching them work, his expression unreadable. He doesn't look happy, Eliza observed. Good. That afternoon, Silas finally shared a piece of his story. 2 years ago, I was driving cattle for Blackwood. Storm came up sudden. My herd broke through fencing, trampled about an acre of your father's wheat. Eliza stopped bundling. What happened? I rode over expecting a fight, maybe a lawsuit. Your father helped me round up the cattle instead. When I offered to pay for damages, he refused. Said neighbors help neighbors. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. That was exactly something her father would say. I've been carrying that debt since. Silas looked across the remaining wheat fields. Some debts don't get paid with money. Now she understood why he'd come. This wasn't charity. It was honor. The 6th day brought new energy to their work. 15 acres remained with 4 days to spare. For the first time since her father's death, Eliza dared to hope. Silas had shed his mysterious air, talking more freely as they worked. He shared stories of other harvests, other farms, other struggles. His voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen both kindness and cruelty in equal measure. Your father wasn't like other landowners, he said while sharpening his scythe. Most would have run me off their property after my cattle caused damage. Some would have shot first, asked questions later. Eliza bundled wheat stalks, thinking of her father's gentle nature. Even when money was tight, he'd never turned away hungry travelers. Even when neighbors gossiped about his success, he'd never responded with anything but courtesy. He believed people were basically good, she said. Said most meanness came from fear or pain. Smart man. The morning passed quickly. By noon, they'd cut another 4 acres. The rhythm they'd developed felt natural now, like they'd been working together for years instead of days. That's when Eliza noticed something that made her stomach clench. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, moving fast and looking dangerous, the kind of storm that could flatten standing wheat in minutes. We need to work faster, she said, pointing at the approaching weather. Silas followed her gaze and his expression darkened. That's not good. They abandoned their careful pace, cutting and bundling with desperate speed. But the storm moved faster than they could work. Wind arrived first, bending wheat stalks and making their tools harder to control. Rain followed in sheets, turning the ground to mud and making footing treacherous. Lightning split the sky with deafening cracks. The barn! Silas shouted over the wind. They ran, abandoning their tools where they lay. The barn door slammed behind them just as hail began pounding the roof like gunshots. Eliza pressed her face to a gap between boards, watching their remaining wheat get battered by wind and ice. 11 acres of standing grain whipped back and forth like grass in a hurricane. "It's ruined," she whispered. "All of it." The storm raged for 2 hours. When it finally passed, an eerie silence settled over the farm. Eliza pushed open the barn door, afraid to look. The wheat field looked like a battlefield. Stalks lay flattened in every direction. Hail had stripped grain from many plants entirely. What had been orderly rows that morning now resembled a disaster zone. Eliza sank to her knees in the mud. After everything they'd accomplished, after coming so close to success, nature had destroyed her chances in a single afternoon. "I can't do this," she said, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "I'm not strong enough." Silas knelt beside her, studying the damaged field. "Look closer." "At what?" "It's destroyed." "Some is, not all." He helped her to her feet. "Wheat's tougher than it looks, like people." He was right. Walking through the field, Eliza could see that while the storm had knocked down most of the grain, many stalks were only bent, not broken. The root systems held. With careful work, much could be salvaged. "We can save maybe half," Silas said after surveying the damage. "If we work through the night. Half won't be enough for the bank payment. Then we better save more than half." Something in his voice made her look at him differently. This wasn't just about repaying her father's kindness anymore. Somewhere between that first day and now, Silas had started caring about her success for its own sake. They worked until their hands bled. By lantern light, they carefully lifted bent stalks, separated damaged grain from salvageable wheat, rebundled what could be saved. The work was painstaking and heartbreaking, but it was also revealing. As they labored side by side in the mud, Silas talked more openly than ever before. "I've worked a lot of farms," he said while examining a damaged wheat bundle. "Never met an owner who understood the land like your father did. He knew every inch of this property." "Including the upstream section?" Silas glanced at her. "You found the deed. Why didn't you tell me you knew about it?" "Wasn't my secret to tell." He set aside a bundle of salvaged grain. "But since you know now." "Yes. Your father showed me that land once. Asked my opinion about something he was considering." "What kind of something?" "The kind that could change everything for your family." Before Eliza could press for more details, voices carried across the night air. She looked up to see lanterns approaching from the road. Pastor Williams led a group of neighbors through the mud toward them. Mrs. Henderson carried a basket of food. Even old Mr. Garrett, who'd bet against her success, brought tools and willing hands. "Heard about the storm," Pastor Williams said simply. "Figured you could use help." For the next 6 hours, the entire community worked to save Eliza's harvest. They separated good grain from damaged, rebundled, salvageable wheat, cleared debris from the field. As dawn broke, Eliza surveyed their night's work. They'd saved about 60% of the storm-damaged grain. Combined with what they'd already harvested, it might be enough. Might be. "Thank you," she told the assembled neighbors. "All of you." "Your father would have done the same for any of us," Pastor Williams replied. "We should have offered help sooner." As the volunteers departed, Eliza found herself alone with Silas again. 3 days remained before the bank payment was due, and 2 acres of damaged wheat still needed attention. But something had changed during that long night of salvage work. The community that had written her off as doomed now saw her differently. She'd proven something to them, and more importantly, to herself. "We're going to make it," she said, surprised by the confidence in her own voice. Silas smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "Yeah, we are." The 7th day brought crisp air and clear skies. 2 acres of storm-damaged wheat remained, but Eliza felt confident for the first time in weeks. They would finish with a day to spare. That confidence shattered when she found water damage in her father's desk. The storm had driven rain through a crack in the kitchen window, soaking the papers she'd left scattered across the wooden surface. Legal documents, bank correspondence, and family letters lay in soggy piles. "Help me save what we can," she called to Silas, carefully separating wet pages. They worked methodically, laying papers flat to dry on every available surface. Most were salvageable, but some documents had become illegible messes of smeared ink. Silas picked up a letter that had been tucked inside a ledger book. The envelope bore the letterhead of Cattleman's Bank of Austin. He frowned as he read the return address. "This isn't from your local bank." Eliza looked over his shoulder at the water-stained correspondence. Her blood ran cold as she made out the faded words. "Dear Mr. Blackwood," the letter began, "regarding the Turner property loan acceleration." Her hands shook as she tried to decipher the smear text. Most was unreadable, but certain phrases stood out like brands burned into her vision. "Mineral survey results, and expedited foreclosure, and agreed-upon terms." "What does this mean?" she whispered. Silas's jaw tightened as he studied the letter. "It means Jeremiah Blackwood knew about your father's upstream property, and he's been working with the bank to steal it from you." The room seemed to spin around Eliza. She sank into her father's chair, trying to process what she was seeing. "The loan wasn't supposed to come due for another year," she said slowly. "Papa told me it wasn't due until next spring. Looks like someone changed the terms without telling your father." More pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Blackwood's frequent visits during her father's illness, his immediate appearance after the funeral with cash offers, his confidence that she would fail. He hadn't been waiting for her to fail. He'd been orchestrating it. "The blocked access to the grain elevator," she said, thinking aloud. "The fence that mysteriously broke last week. The rumors spreading through town about my incompetence. All calculated to make sure you couldn't succeed." Silas set down the damaged letter with careful control. "He's been playing a longer game than we realized." Rage filled Eliza's chest, hot and fierce. This wasn't just about saving her farm anymore. This was about justice. But rage alone wouldn't solve her problem. She needed proof, and most of their evidence was ruined by water damage. "We need to see that upstream property," she said suddenly. "If it's valuable enough for Blackwood to steal, I need to know what I'm fighting for." Silas hesitated. "Eliza, we've got wheat to finish. 2 days left. 1 day to finish. 1 day to understand what my father died protecting." The ride upstream took an hour through rough terrain. Eliza had never been this far from the farmhouse, had never seen the land her father purchased in secret. What she found took her breath away. The upstream property sat beside a creek that ran clear and fast over rocky ground, but it wasn't the water that made her gasp. It was the way the sun caught flecks of metal in the exposed creek bank. "Gold?" she whispered. "Silver, more likely. Maybe both." Silas dismounted, picking up a handful of creek gravel. Metallic flecks glittered in his palm. "Your father suspected, but he needed to be sure before filing any mining claims. How much could it be worth? Hard to say without proper surveying, but enough to make you wealthy. Enough to make Blackwood desperate." Eliza stared at the glittering creek, understanding flooding through her. This was why her father made those mysterious Sunday trips. He'd been testing the water, checking the deposits, planning a future he didn't live to see, a future Blackwood intended to steal. They rode back to the farm in tense silence. Eliza's mind raced with possibilities and plans. She had the upstream deed, but only if she could keep the original farm. She had evidence of Blackwood's conspiracy, but water damage made it questionable in any legal proceeding. She had 2 days to harvest enough wheat to satisfy the bank and expose a man with enough influence to manipulate loan terms from Austin. The odds were still against her, but now she understood the true stakes. That evening, Pastor Williams arrived with troubling news. "Blackwood's been asking questions around town," he said, accepting a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. "Wants to know how much help you've been getting, how much wheat you've actually saved." "Let him ask. There's more. He's been talking to people about the legality of outside labor on family farms, suggesting there might be irregularities in your harvest methods." Eliza felt ice in her veins. What kind of irregularities? The kind that might invalidate your crop sale if he can prove improper assistance. Silas leaned against the doorframe, his expression grim. He's looking for any excuse to disqualify your harvest. Even if you succeed, he wants grounds to challenge it. Can he do that? Pastor Williams spread his hands helplessly. Rich man with connections? He can try anything he wants. After the pastor left, Eliza sat at her father's desk, staring at the dried but still damaged correspondence. Somewhere in these water-stained papers lay proof of Blackwood's conspiracy. But would anyone believe smeared ink and illegible signatures? We need more evidence, she said finally. We need to finish the harvest first, Silas replied. Everything else comes after that. But Eliza was already forming a plan that went beyond simply saving wheat. If Blackwood wanted to play a longer game, she would learn his rules and beat him at his own strategy. The girl who'd collapsed in the wheat field a week ago was gone. In her place stood a woman ready for war. The 8th day dawned with purpose. 2 acres of damaged wheat remained, but Eliza's focus had shifted beyond simple survival. She needed to finish the harvest and gather evidence of Blackwood's conspiracy. While Silas worked the final wheat sections, Eliza rode into town with a clear mission. Her first stop was the telegraph office. I need to send a wire to Cattleman's Bank of Austin, she told the clerk. The message was simple but pointed. She requested copies of all correspondence regarding the Turner Farm loan, citing her rights as the inheritor. If Blackwood had manipulated the loan terms, there would be records. Her next stop was the land office. The clerk, a nervous man named Peterson, seemed uncomfortable when she asked about mineral rights surveys in her area. Haven't done any surveys recently, he said, not meeting her eyes. What about private surveys? The kind someone might commission without filing public records? Peterson's face went pale. I wouldn't know anything about that. But his reaction told Eliza everything. Someone had been surveying her land, and Peterson knew who. She found Pastor Williams at the church, organizing supplies for Sunday service. I need your help, she said without preamble. Not just as a pastor, but as someone who cares about justice. She showed him the water-damaged correspondence, explaining what she'd discovered about Blackwood's manipulation of her loan. This is serious, he said, studying the smeared documents. But proving it won't be easy. I'm not asking you to prove anything, I'm asking you to witness. That afternoon, while Silas finished cutting the last standing wheat, a small crowd gathered at the Turner farm. Pastor Williams had spread word carefully, inviting key members of the community to observe something important. Blackwood arrived shortly after 4 o'clock, flanked by 2 of his men. His confident smile faded when he saw the assembled witnesses. Quite a gathering, he said, dismounting near the farmhouse. Celebrating your success, Miss Turner? Something like that. Eliza stood on the porch, the water-damaged letter in her hands. I wanted to thank you publicly for your interest in my welfare. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Always happy to help a neighbor. Yes, you've been so helpful, especially with the bank arrangements. The silence stretched taut. Blackwood's men shifted uncomfortably. The assembled townspeople sensed tension, but didn't understand its source. I'm not sure what you're implying, Blackwood said carefully. I'm not implying anything. Eliza held up the damaged letter. I'm stating facts about loan modifications, about mineral surveys, about systematic sabotage designed to steal my family's land. That's quite an accusation. It's quite a crime. Blackwood stepped closer to the porch, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Be very careful, girl. You're playing a game you don't understand. I understand it perfectly. Eliza's voice carried clearly to every witness. You discovered mineral deposits on my upstream property. You manipulated my father's loan through your banking connections. You've been orchestrating my failure to steal land worth a fortune. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? Silas appeared around the corner of the house, leading Blackwood's former surveyor by the arm. The man looked terrified, but determined. Tell them what you told me, Silas said quietly. The surveyor's voice shook as he spoke. Mr. Blackwood hired me to test the Turner Creek last spring. Found significant silver deposits. Maybe gold, too. Blackwood's face turned red with fury. Henderson, you signed an agreement. I signed an agreement to survey land, not to help steal it from a dead man's daughter. The crowd murmured with growing anger. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his voice carrying moral authority. Is this true, Jeremiah? Have you been stealing from this family? I haven't stolen anything. I made legitimate business offers. After manipulating her loan terms, Silas added. After blocking her access to grain markets. After spreading rumors designed to undermine her efforts. More witnesses stepped forward. The grain elevator operator admitted to being pressured to delay Eliza's harvest deliveries. A bank clerk confirmed suspicious communications from Austin regarding the Turner loan. Blackwood found himself surrounded by angry neighbors, his conspiracy exposed by his own greed. This doesn't change anything, he said desperately. She still can't prove the mineral deposits belong to her. Actually, I can. Eliza produced the upstream property deed, now dry but still legible. My father owned that land legally. The deposits belong to his estate. We'll see what a court says about that. Yes, we will. Eliza smiled with cold satisfaction. I've already contacted the territorial marshal. He's very interested in bank fraud and conspiracy to steal mineral rights. Blackwood's confidence finally cracked. He looked around at hostile faces, realizing his position was untenable. This isn't over, he muttered. Yes, it is. Silas stepped beside Eliza on the porch. Your schemes are exposed. Your influence is broken. Find somewhere else to steal from. Blackwood and his men mounted their horses and rode away without another word. As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with excitement about the dramatic confrontation, Eliza finally allowed herself to breathe. Think he'll cause more trouble? She asked Silas. Not the kind he can't handle legally. You've got too many witnesses now. That evening, they loaded the last wagon with bundled wheat. The harvest was complete, and the bank payment was secured. But more importantly, Eliza had protected her father's true legacy. The upstream property would provide wealth for generations. The conspiracy was exposed and defeated. Justice had prevailed through truth and community support, rather than violence or revenge. Standing in the empty wheat field as sunset painted the sky orange and gold, Eliza felt her father's presence like a blessing. She had kept her promise. She had preserved what he built and discovered what he planned. The scared girl who'd collapsed in this same field a week ago was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had faced down corruption and won. The 9th day arrived with golden sunlight streaming across empty wheat fields. Silas stood at the edge of the harvested land, surveying their completed work. Neat rows of bundled grain stretched toward the barn, ready for transport to market. Eliza joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Steam rose from the hot liquid in the cool morning air. Hard to believe it's finished, she said. Silas accepted the coffee, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm cup. He looked across the field they'd saved together, the field that had nearly broken her spirit just over a week ago. It's done, he said simply. Those 2 words carried the weight of everything they'd accomplished. Not just the harvest, but the conspiracy they'd exposed, the community they'd united, the future they'd secured. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the desperate tears she'd shed in this same field. These came from relief, from pride, from gratitude. I couldn't have managed this alone. You were never meant to manage it alone. Your father knew that when he built this place. Community matters. A wagon approached from town, driven by Pastor Williams. Behind him came more wagons, more neighbors, all arriving to help transport the harvested wheat to market. Thought you might need assistance getting your crop to the grain elevator, Pastor Williams called out. Mrs. Henderson climbed down from the second wagon, carrying baskets of food. Figured we'd make a celebration of it. The same people who'd whispered about her inevitable failure now worked cheerfully to ensure her success. They loaded bundles of wheat, calculated weights and values, planned the most efficient route to market. By noon, the entire harvest was loaded and ready for transport. Based on current grain prices, Eliza would earn enough to pay the banknote with money left over for improvements and next year's planting. But the wheat was only the beginning of her transformed circumstances. That afternoon, Territorial Marshal Jackson arrived with official documents. Blackwood's conspiracy had been thoroughly investigated, his banking connections severed, his influence in the territory permanently damaged. "He won't be bothering you again," Marshal Jackson assured her. "The bank fraud charges alone will keep him occupied for years." More importantly, the marshal brought confirmation of Eliza's mineral rights. The upstream property was legally hers, and preliminary assays suggested silver deposits worth tens of thousands of dollars. "You'll need to file proper mining claims," he explained, "but the land and everything under it belongs to you free and clear." As the marshal departed, Silas found Eliza sitting on the porch steps, staring at the legal documents that had transformed her from desperate farm girl to wealthy landowner in the span of 9 days. "Overwhelming?" he asked, settling beside her. "Terrifying. This morning I was worried about making one bank payment. Now I'm responsible for mining operations and business decisions worth more money than I can imagine. Your father prepared you better than you realize. You've got the intelligence for business and the strength for whatever comes next." Eliza looked at Silas, this man who'd appeared when she needed him most, who'd worked without payment, who'd helped her discover courage she didn't know she possessed. "What happens now?" she asked. "You've repaid your debt to Papa. You could go anywhere, do anything." "I could." He met her eyes steadily. "Question is whether you want me to stay." The answer came without hesitation. "I want you to stay." "For the mining operation?" "For everything. For the farm, for the future, for building something together." She took his hand, feeling calluses that matched her own. "If you'll have me as a partner in more than just harvest work." His smile transformed his weathered face. "Yes to all of it." That evening, the community gathered for an impromptu celebration. Tables appeared in the yard, loaded with food and drink. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting warm light over laughing faces. Eliza moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, but her attention kept returning to Silas. He stood near the barn talking with other men about farming techniques and weather patterns, fitting seamlessly into the community fabric. Pastor Williams approached with a glass of cider and a satisfied expression. "Your father would be proud," he said, "not just of saving the farm, but of how you handled Blackwood. Took real courage to face him down like that." "Courage and good friends." Eliza raised her glass toward Silas. "And the right help at the right time. Funny how that works, like it was meant to be." As the celebration continued into the night, Eliza found herself thinking about destiny and choices, about the chain of events that had brought Silas to her farm at exactly the moment she needed him most. His cattle breaking her fence 2 years ago had seemed like a disaster at the time. Her father's kindness in that moment had created a debt of honor. That debt had brought Silas back when she was drowning in impossibility. Now they would build something neither could have created alone. The last guests departed near midnight, leaving Eliza and Silas to clean up by lantern light. They worked in comfortable silence, stacking chairs and collecting dishes, partners in the small tasks as they'd been in the monumental ones. "Tomorrow we start planning the mining operation," Eliza said, blowing out the final lantern. "Tomorrow." Silas took her hand as they walked toward the house. "Tonight we rest." Above them, stars shone down on empty wheat fields and full hearts. The harvest was complete, the conspiracy defeated, the future secured. 2 people who'd started as strangers united by debt and desperation had become partners bound by respect and love. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, its voice carrying across the Texas landscape where dreams could die hard or grow strong, depending on the courage of those who tended them. Eliza Turner had tended her dreams well.